Hello, psychology folks. So I'm sitting here with my Virginia Tech cap, watching the Virginia Tech Western Michigan football game, and score right now is 18-10. Tech's not really running away with it like we kind of hoped they would, and also the satellite feed of the game is cutting in and out, and so it goes black every time somebody is about to score a touchdown. So since that's not very fun, I'll take some time to start our video lecture. And I realized, or was reminded, that in our last class, I forgot to cover the answer to the bus question. It's interesting because the class I had last semester, made up mostly of adults, looked at this picture and said, it's not possible to tell which direction the bus is traveling. This is not a fair question. Many of you got it right, or at least generally correct. What I think is interesting is that this puzzle, according to this graph, was shown to a group of preschool children in the U.S., and 90% of them said the bus was going left. And of course, when asked why, they said because you can't see the door to get on the school bus. So school children who ride the bus a lot were able to look at that and say, of course it's going left because of the door on the bus. Adults who typically maybe don't take the bus were not able to solve the puzzle because they didn't have the context in their head to look at that and realize that a bus only has a door on the right side. So this bus would have to be going that way. A couple of interesting exceptions. If we ask this question in Great Britain, then the bus would be going in this direction, since in Great Britain traffic travels on the left-hand side. But another student, I believe it was Philip, made the interesting observation that the bus could be going backward. And if the bus were backing up, then the bus would be traveling to the right. I had never considered that. So Philip gets a gold star for critical thinking. And I'm actually going to have to remember that and put that into into the PowerPoint for the next time I teach this class. So excellent job on the bus. I'm going to take a second and just do a real quick review on plasticity because this is fairly important. It won't take long. But again, this is how the brain repairs itself, how the neurons make up for damaged neurons if something were to happen, most commonly a stroke. If you had a blood clot that killed a section of neurons here, one of the things that could happen, collateral sprouting, and that would be the healthy neurons would grow branches. You wouldn't grow new neurons, but you'd grow additional longer branches of the existing neurons, and they would make that connection and take up the function of the damaged neurons. Another possibility for the brain repairing itself, substitution of function. So if part of your brain's destroyed, let's say the part that allows you to recognize words and read, then your brain would assign that function to another part of itself, and that's where new learning would take place, and you could learn to read again, as has happened. Also neurogenesis, remember that is when new neurons are created, new nerve cells, typically only happens in infants, has been observed in adults, but only in the hippocampus and olfactory bulb, and it doesn't last very long, and they're not even sure how those nerve cells function. Brain grafts are also possible, where you can take healthy tissue, healthy brain cells, or maybe brain stem cells, and put them in a damaged brain. The challenge there is it involves using fetal tissue, and that is very controversial in human beings. So collateral sprouting, substitution of function, neurogenesis, and brain grafts, likely using stem cells. And then also we'll just quickly again go over the types, the ways to study the brain. brain lesioning, where you actually go in and damage part of the brain and then study the results. That would typically be done in animals. It would not be ethical to do in humans unless you used, as I described in class, that virtual brain lesioning, where you take a machine and actually generate a magnetic pulse in a particular spot inside the brain, and you can temporarily disrupt the brain's activity, and in that way you can go in and measure how the body or how the brain reacts. And I think I actually have a picture. Let's see if I can drag it over here of the transcranial of this brain lesioning. It's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, and if you can see that, there is what it looks like. You can see the doctor or individual is holding this device, and that's actually a magnetic ring that is generating a magnetic field through here. And these little points actually tell a scanner where in space this device is, and so as he moves this device around the subject's head, a computer is tracking where exactly the electromagnetic pulses are stimulating, so that when things happen, let's say suddenly her lips go numb or suddenly she can't say words correctly, they know exactly what part of the brain is being stimulated. So that's the transcranial magnetic stimulation. Another part of studying the brain, electrical recording. We talked about the electroencephalograph, the EEG, where you put the cap on with all of these mapped sensors, and it records your brain activity, strip like this, and one way that they can diagnose or help treat epilepsy, because this tells them what part of the brain is experiencing that magnetic storm that we saw in the video last time. Brain imaging using X-rays would be an X-ray, CT scan, computerized axial tomography, or PET scan. You remember the CT scan shows slices of the head. You can see the tissue there. The PET scan actually glows a certain color based on that's actually based on the use of glucose. They can find brain tumors in this way because the brain tumors use more glucose than typical cells. Then there are the magnetic imaging techniques. MRI, magnetic resonant imaging, creates a magnetic field around the body, and that way they're able to generate these images. Very detailed, more detailed than a CT scan. However, it is more expensive, takes longer, you have to lie really, really still, whereas a CAT scan, CT scan, is not as difficult to get. That's why if you're in a car accident, probably the first thing you're going to get is a CAT scan, because it's very easy to do. There you can see the difference. Went through that. I think we already went through the advantages and disadvantages. And then the functional MRI, fMRI, that can actually measure the change in blood flow. So when somebody is in that MRI tube doing something, you can figure out what part of their brain is activated. If, for example, you had them play a memory game, and they actually do this, they'll play a memory game, and as you're trying to remember something, they'll look and see what part of your brain is getting more blood flow, and that tells them which part of your brain is working with that memory. They had doctors, the functional MRI at the Virginia Tech Croydon School of Medicine took doctors and had doctors, while they were laying in the MRI tube, make decisions about patient diagnoses. And that way they could look and see what parts of the brain were activated while making those patient diagnosis signals, or those patient diagnosis decisions. It's interesting, have you ever noticed how easy it is for you to memorize song lyrics? Sometimes song lyrics will just automatically come to mind when it's hard to memorize other things like test questions. They have put people in these functional MRIs, had them listen to music, and the brain lights up all over the place. It activates an incredible number of brain locations. So maybe if you put your test answers to music, you might have better luck memorizing them. Not that this group is having much trouble with tests. You guys are doing great. All right, time to talk about the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a set of glands that regulate the activities of certain organs by releasing their chemicals called hormones into the bloodstream. Why is this important? We've already talked about two different methods of communication. Essentially, we've talked about the nerves bringing information into the brain, that form of communication. The afferent nerves, the nerves sending information out of the brain to the various parts of the body, telling it what to do, whether it's to swing your fist and punch something or whatever. The endocrine system is also a communications process in the body. It's not as quick. The endocrine system involves glands releasing chemicals into the bloodstream, and as those chemicals flow through the bloodstream, then they're able to communicate with other parts of the body and tell it what to do. So the glands in the endocrine systems are the organs in the body that create those chemicals that control many of the bodily functions, and the endocrine system and the nervous system are interconnected. So hormones, those are the chemical messengers produced by the endocrine glands. I don't know why I can't say that. Now, don't confuse hormones with neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are those chemicals that are in the vesicles at the end of the axon that pop out when stimulated and transmit and attach to the dendrite of the next cell and keep the signal going. Hormones are different. Hormones are released into the blood by our glands. Here's a video that may help you understand it better than I'm doing right now.
When we accidentally touch something hot, the heat sensation travels instantly along sensory nerves, and the impulse to jerk our hand away travels instantly back along motor nerves. The nervous system coordinates these kinds of quick response actions. However, another type of coordination is required to regulate our metabolic activities, such as causing our heart to beat faster when we're afraid, which prepares us for quick action if necessary, or maintaining proper glucose levels in our blood, which requires monitoring 24 hours a day, day after day. This type of coordination is performed by the endocrine system. The endocrine system works to produce a condition called homeostasis, literally standing still, or stationariness. In this context, it is used to describe the proper balance of chemicals and other substances in the body, and the harmonious functioning and coordination of all the various bodily processes and organ systems. The endocrine system helps maintain this state of balance in the body by performing a regulatory role for all the other organ systems. The endocrine system consists primarily of glands and endocrine tissue inside other organs, like the pancreas, that secrete hormones directly into our bloodstream. Hormones are chemical messengers that travel through our circulatory system to other parts of the body in order to control or regulate a body process, such as growth, temperature control, or water retention. In some cases, the hormone targets a specific organ or tissue. In other cases, the hormone's effect is more general. Some hormones stimulate other glands to release yet other hormones. Hormones work by only binding to those cells which have appropriate receptors on their cell walls. Kind of like that child's toy in which holes and blocks have different shapes, and you must match the correct block with the appropriate hole. Once the hormone binds to its target cell and delivers its message, the cell goes to work and does whatever it's been ordered to do.
So here are the different parts of the endocrine system, and unlike the brain and the central nervous system, where everything is sort of based up here in the brain and along the spinal column, the endocrine system is scattered around our body pretty diversely. So you've got, you can see the pineal gland, the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenal gland on the kidney there, and the pancreas, ovary, the testes. Don't want to necessarily need to get into a huge amount of detail about these glands, and so don't fear all the text on the screen. Honestly, and being totally honest, I was sort of just being lazy, and I copied some of this over. But we'll talk about what the most important things are. The pituitary gland. The pituitary is the master gland because it influences other glands. It makes hormones. There you see the pituitary right there. It makes hormones that stimulate other endocrine glands, some of these other glands, to produce their hormones. So it's sort of the boss gland. It's in charge. In the back of the pituitary, the anterior pituitary, just a list of some of the hormones that it stimulates. Prolactin, which stimulates milk production after pregnancy and birth. Growth hormone, that's the hormone that actually makes you grow as a child. Your muscles and your bones. If something goes wrong with that, then you're not going to grow. Adrenocorticotrophin, which stimulates cortisol. That's the hormone that cranks out when you are under stress. Some of us, myself included, have way too much of that. Thyroid-stimulating hormones, luteinizing hormones, which regulates testosterone and estrogen, and the hormone that triggers ovulation. So that's the pituitary. Another part of the pituitary releases oxytocin, which makes nursing happen, and an antidiuretic, which regulates water balance. And if you think about it, your water balance is extremely important. If the fluid in your body is too diluted, then all those sodium atoms that you need to effectively send signals through your nervous system aren't going to be there. So here's one example of how the endocrine system and the nervous system are connected. The hypothalamus, see it's the blue section right there, that is part of the brain that also involves in growth hormone releasing, and also hormones that tell the pituitary to make a hormone that stimulates follicles and things that are important for puberty and reproduction. The thymus, that's a gland that is important for your immune function. Interesting that it's very, very large in a child and weighs the most at puberty, which sort of makes sense in that it's there to protect the child's, to enhance the child's immune system and protect the child from danger and dangerous bacteria and viruses and so forth. The pineal gland is an interesting gland, mainly because scientists aren't really sure what it does. If this is your brain, and of course your eyes are here, the back of your brain there, the pineal gland is this little nub right there above the cerebellum. They know that it makes melatonin, and melatonin, some of you be aware, is one of the hormones that makes you get sleepy, so that it functions with sleep. It also makes a hormone that causes the ovaries and the testes to function. But other than that, the pineal gland is sort of mysterious, and it's sort of interesting that H.P. Lovecraft, who's an author of horror novels and which have been made into movies, and a couple of my favorite old-time screamers are Lovecraft movies. His theory in his writings was that the pineal gland, that was sort of the ESP gland. That was the gland that connected us to other dimensions and other worlds. And Lovecraft, one of his movies, it's called From Beyond. He creates this scenario where a scientist builds these large tuning forks, and as these tuning forks vibrate, they stimulate the pineal gland, and people can be more aware of what's around them. Of course, in a Lovecraft story, that's not a good thing. I'm going to just see if this works here. See if you can watch this video. This is a section of From Beyond, and when the pineal gland is stimulated, they start seeing that there are things floating around them in other universes.
And the whole idea with these creatures flying around is that we can't see them until our senses are enhanced by this resonator.
So maybe not a good thing to have your pineal gland stimulated. And in Lovecraft's story, in From Beyond, the main character, who's also the main villain, has his pineal gland stimulated so much that it pops out the front of his head and sort of wiggles around like a third eye. So just be warned, stay away from large resonating tuning forks, because it could cause your pineal gland to pop out of your forehead, and no one really wants that. The testes produces testosterone, the ovaries, of course, estrogen and progesterone. The thyroid, this is a gland around the front of your neck, and it has hormones in it that control your metabolism, which is really all about your ability to break down food and store it as either energy or use it as energy. Thyroid's interesting because I don't know if you have ever heard the phrase when somebody is significantly overweight that they have a glandular problem. I know sometimes people think, oh, well, it's just an excuse. I mean, it's really not. If the thyroid's not working right, then the body may well be converting all the food you eat into energy and no fat, which is how the body stores energy. The body stores energy in fat cells, which might lead you to be way too thin, or the body may not store or may not take the food you eat and turn it into energy. It may be taking all the food you eat and storing it all as fat cells. When you think about that situation, if your thyroid's messed up, not only is all the food you eat going into fat cells, but none of the food you eat is going into energy. So you've got a situation where you're generating extra fat cells and excuse me, you have no energy to go and exercise and burn it off. And as a result, some people can, that's in some cases why you have people who become extremely overweight, 400, 500, 600 pounds. It's a situation where it's literally not their fault. It's a misfire of that of a gland. Sometimes too, the thyroid can go a little wacky and swell, and you can get something called a goiter. The good news is, a goiter is caused by lack of iodine, which we do not have in this country. If you're wondering why we don't have the lack of iodine in this country, that's because the salt that you eat is iodized. If you've ever looked at that can of Morton salt, let's see, where do I have a picture of a can? Yeah, here it is. So you buy your Morton salt, and you'll see that iodized salt, and you note that it says this salt supplies iodine, a necessary nutrient. If you've ever wondered why that is so you don't get a goiter. That's caused by a lack of iodine. Interestingly enough, with sort of the new options for eating, you might note that there are other types of salt that you can get. Sea salt, kosher salt. If you look at the label, that will warn you that those salts do not supply iodine. So if you're getting all of your salt that you're adding to your food from some of these more, the designer salts like your sea salt and your or other types of salt, you may not be getting enough iodine. So you might make sure you, in moderation, get that normal iodized salt, because iodine is important. The adrenal glands. You actually have two. The adrenal cortex and then the adrenal medulla, which is interesting because those are the same words used to describe the brain. The adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys, create glucocorticoids, which help you control your blood sugar, burning protein and fat, helps you respond to things like fever and major illnesses and injuries. also controlling your blood pressure, which is important. The adrenal gland also produces epinephrine, which you probably are more familiar with the name adrenaline, and that's the hormone that cranks up your heart rate, opens your airways so you can breathe, and cranks up your muscle flow. Now, this is also a good example of how the endocrine system is connected to the nervous system. Remember we talked about the sympathetic nervous system, so that when something happens and you have that fight or flight syndrome kick in, you see the big scary shadow in the dark alley, and you're immediately tensed up and your heart goes and you're ready to either run or fight. That's started by the sympathetic nervous system, which triggers the endocrine system, which triggers the adrenal glands to crank out adrenaline and give you that power and ability to do all that stuff, or to lift the big car off the baby and so forth. So those are the adrenal glands. Parathyroid, behind the thyroid gland, hormones that control calcium and phosphorus, important for bone development. Also maintaining normal blood calcium level, very important for the heart, muscle, and nerve function. Calcium is one of those electrolytes that are important for the electrical activity that goes on in your body. And then the pancreas, which sits over there behind your stomach, that maintains your blood glucose levels. Very important, because glucose in your blood, that's where all of your energy comes from. If your glucose levels get too low, then you pass out because you don't have enough energy to make your cells activate. If your glucose gets too high, that causes damage to all kinds of things, your kidneys, your blood vessels, and that is, of course, when you have diabetes, high blood sugar. The too high blood sugar causes damage. Pancreas also secretes glucagon, which cranks your blood sugar up when it is low. All right, genetics. What are genes? And no, the answer is not what you are wearing right now and what I'm wearing right now. Genes are part of your chromosomes. Now, a chromosome is that thread-like structure. You have 23 pair in the nucleus of each of your cells, and on those 23 pairs, one member of each pair comes from each one of your parents. A chromosome is made up of DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, which is a very complex molecule that carries genetic information. So the purpose of DNA is to communicate genetic information. So here now we have another type of communication in the body. We've got the nerves communicating, we've got the endocrine system communicating with their hormones, and now you've got the chromosomes communicating with their genes. And the genes on the chromosome body have that data. It's almost like having a little hard drive built into every cell that has all the data necessary to make you. So here you've got just an example of, there is a cell. If you were to look inside the nucleus of the cell, you'd see these little X-looking things, and those are chromosomes. And each chromosome is actually, while it looks like an X, that X is made up of these long, tiny strands of proteins. And if you were to pull those strands apart and look really, really close with a microscope, you'd see that the proteins are in this ladder structure, and all these little slats in the ladder are the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, and they form a pattern. And it's that pattern that carries the genetic information. Here you've got another, this is from the book, but it's a little bit better. You can see the chromosomes inside the nucleus of the cell, and they're actually made up of all this coiled up material, and that coiled material contains the DNA, which makes up your genes. Two important things to remember about genetics. Your genes tell us, or your genes tell your body what color hair you're going to have, what color eyes you're going to have, all of these physical things that make up who you are. Now, I'm sure you've seen a situation where you might have a mom and dad both have black hair, and baby comes out with blonde hair. How in the world can that happen? That's because mom and dad may have both the genes for black hair and blonde hair in their DNA, but the blonde hair gene is the one that pops out in the baby. I, for example, have red hair. What hair that I have left. But I also have people in my family who have black hair. So it's very likely I have the genetic information to tell my body to make both red and black hair, but in my case, the genetic information for red hair won out because my hair, this part of it, is actually reddish. So, important thing to know, the genotype is the actual genetic material in your cell, whether you can see it or not. So if I have a gene for black hair and a gene for red hair, even though you don't see black hair on my head, my genotype is to have black and red hair. The phenotype is what you actually see. So my genotype would be black hair and red hair. My phenotype would be red hair because that's what I ended up with. Somebody might have a gene for straight hair and a gene for maybe their mom had straight hair and their dad had curly hair. And so they have a gene for straight hair and a gene for curly hair. So that's their genotype, one of each, but the curly hair gene won because they have curly hair, so their phenotype would be curly. So remember, genotype is what genes you actually have in your cells. Phenotype is what you can actually see. So hopefully that makes some sense. There are ways that we manipulate people's genes. One is called molecular genetics. That is manipulating genes using technology to determine their effect on behavior. And yes, our genes can affect our behavior. There is selective breeding, where organisms are chosen for reproduction based on how much of a trait they display. This is, classic example would be in breeding animals. People breed purebred cats and dogs, and they'll breed them for certain color fur, certain characteristics. You could, from a not physical point of view, but more psychological, you could breed dogs that are more aggressive, which unfortunately has been done in the case of pit bulls that are bred for fighting. What you would more likely want to do, and make more sense to me, would be to breed animals that would be less aggressive and more able to serve as pets or service animals. Be very important to make sure that you had service animals that aren't aggressive. Behavior genetics, the study of the degree and nature of heredity's influence on behavior. How much does your heredity, your background, the genetic information that you get from your parents, how much does what's in your cells actually impact who you are and how you behave? Is everything you do based on your experiences and your learning, or are some of the things you do based on what's wired in your DNA? One of the ways they look at that is through twin studies. And in twin studies, they will take and look at twins that have been separated at birth. Maybe there was a divorce or something, but whatever happened, these two twins that have identical DNA, identical genetic information, but they've never known each other, they're raised in completely different circumstances. They'll look at those twins and they'll see, how are they different and how are they the same? If some of those twins' behaviors are exactly the same, even though they've been raised in completely different circumstances, that leads you to suspect that those behaviors are tied to their identical genes because their upbringing was completely different. If, however, you have completely separate up, let's say one of them is very mild and calm and the other one is prone to angry outbursts, then that's likely not related to genetics. That's maybe more related to how they were raised. That's the idea of behavior genetics. And per usual, I've kind of stumbled and fumbled through this gene explanation, so we've got a video that I think will do a better job than I have of explaining to you how genes work. So here we go.
Stated Clearly presents, what exactly is a gene? Each one of our cells contains 46 strands of DNA. A single strand is made of millions of particles called nucleotides, and these nucleotides come in 4 different types, which scientists have labeled A, C, T, and G. A gene is a special stretch of DNA, a sequence of A's, C's, T's, and G's that code for something. A gene contains information for a cell to read and use, but what exactly does that information do? You might have heard that there's a blue-eyed gene, a freckle gene, possibly even an anger gene, but single genes don't literally make things like eyeballs or freckles or temper tantrums. Genes make proteins. Those proteins then interact with each other and all sorts of chemicals inside the body to build things like eye pigments, freckles, and mood-altering hormones. A single strand of DNA contains thousands of genes or unique protein recipes. Humans have roughly 20,000 altogether. Some genes are small, only about 300 letters long. Others are well over 1 million. The length and sequence of a gene determine the size and shape of the protein it builds. The size and shape of the protein determine the function that protein will have inside the body. Hemoglobin, for example, is a protein structure found in red blood cells. Its unique shape and size allow it to capture oxygen molecules when blood flows near the lungs, and then release them later when blood flows near oxygen-starved tissues. Pepsin is a digestive protein. Its unique shape allows it to break down food inside your stomach so it can be absorbed by the body. Keratin is a structural protein. Its unique shape and size allow it to link together with other keratin proteins to form hard structures like fingernails, claws, and beaks. Different creatures have different genes, which is ultimately why their bodies look and function differently, but one of the many reasons scientists believe all life on Earth is related is that the basic DNA code, the language of A's, C's, T's, and G's, is pretty much the same for all living things. Many creatures even share some of the same genes. You might not be too surprised to learn that humans and chimps, which are closely related, share 96% of their genetic code. But what would you think a lowly fruit fly has in common with a beautiful swimsuit model? Surprisingly, about half of its genes. Because all creatures use DNA in pretty much the same way, genetic engineers have found that if they take a gene from, say, a bacteria cell and insert it into the DNA of an animal or a plant cell, that animal or plant cell will then read the new gene and produce the bacterial protein. Engineers have mixed and matched the genes of different organisms to produce many new creatures, including corn that is toxic to insects but supposedly safe for human consumption, tomatoes that last up to twice as long in the grocery store before going bad, and a new form of bacteria that produce the human protein insulin, which we then collect from these bacteria and give to people with diabetes who need extra insulin to survive. So just to sum things up a bit, what exactly is a gene? A gene is a special stretch of DNA, not the entire strand of DNA, just a segment that codes for something. Each gene is like a unique recipe, which usually tells a cell how to make a protein or a group of proteins. Different creatures have different genes, but all genes are written in the same basic DNA language of A's, C's, T's, and G's. I'm John Perry, and that's Genes Stated Clearly.
So, we see then how the genes, and that video did a really good job, how the genes tell the body to create protein. So, how could a gene telling a body to create a certain type of protein affect psychology? How is it possible that your genes with all their little protein buildings would make you behave in one way or another way. This next video is an excerpt from a longer series about behavior, but it explains how your genetic makeup might make you more likely to take chances.
Some scientists believe such character traits are in the genes we inherit.
Yeah, I guess I am a risk taker. I mean, if someone dares me to do something, I gotta do it. You know, I can't say, no, I'm not gonna do that. My younger brother is definitely a dare taker. I mean, I think he's worse than I am. And I guess we both get it from my mom. Through her life, she did a lot of things. Race cars for many years, won many trophies, did horseback riding. She does things on her own.
Some geneticists believe that genes may predispose us to act certain ways, even when it comes to something like taking risks. Dr. Dean Hamer is trying to find the link between genes and how they affect behavior.
All that genes do is to code for proteins, and all the proteins do is to control chemical reactions inside the brain. So there is no gene that says go bungee jumping or jump off the high dive or smoke a cigarette. The genes simply alter our brain chemistry in rather subtle ways.
To research what Hamer calls the novelty-seeking gene, he compares the behavior of siblings and their DNA.
We're the O'Neill family, and I'm Tommy. This is Johnny. That's Paul, and that's Joey.
Suppose that we had two brothers who were at a swimming pool. Well, if one of the brothers decided to go off the high dive and jump into the water, maybe do a flip on the way down, he would probably have the novelty-seeking gene. That makes his brain respond to dopamine, which is released when you do a novel experience, in a positive way, and he would feel pleasure from that. If the other brother decided not to go off the high dive and to go down the ladder instead, he probably wouldn't have the novelty-seeking gene, but he might have the anxiety gene. That gene controls serotonin, and when he did that experience, he would get a flash of serotonin that would make his brain feel very bad, would feel anxious and worried, and so he would be less likely to dive off the high dive. So just by looking at those two genes, we could tell something about whether or not people get excitement from a new activity like high diving, or whether that same activity makes them feel anxious. And it's all because their genes are a little bit different. That makes their brain chemistry just a little bit different as well.
Okay, I don't think I have the novelty-seeking gene. I would have been like the guy backing away from the high dive. I don't think I would be doing a handstand on the high dive and jumping. But it leads us to our question and our writing assignment for today. Reply to this video lecture by writing a brief, and by brief we mean a 5-sentence paragraph on this topic. Are you a risk taker or a safety seeker? Do you think this could be because of your genes, and why or why not? So that is your paragraph response. We'll at some point be talking about learning soon, so if you're looking for something to do, you might start looking over the section in your textbook on learning. Also, do not forget we have the one-page critical thinking paper. That's due also here in a couple of weeks, I think. So don't forget about that. And please try to post your writing assignment by Wednesday so other folks can have the opportunity to respond. Again, this is write your paragraph and then respond to 2 other paragraphs. And please try to get that started early in the week, no later than Wednesday, so other folks will have paragraphs to respond to, because we don't want everybody having to respond to the same person's paragraph. That's no fun for anybody. All right, sounds good. Hokies are winning 35-17, so it's looking good, and my TV is now working, so I'm going to go back to watching the game. You have a great weekend.